Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was June 9th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is from Joan's Sigilli Secreti Register, the secret seal. And those of you who have been listening for a while won't be surprised to hear me repeat that the secret seal is not a top secret document like what we would think of today with the word secret. It's more of just a privacy. It's like a private seal. It's more of a prestige item sometimes than it is any kind of top secret message. It just is indicating that this particular document is maybe more connected personally to the monarch themselves. And so when we're looking at this level of seal, we shouldn't really infer that there's anything very sensitive, secret going on necessarily. Although sometimes there is. All right, so this particular document is in Latin, but if you look at it, you will see there is a lot of worm damage. And that's because this is at the beginning of a register. It's at the very beginning of Register 1954. It's Folio 3V. And so my theory is that these were stored horizontally because there's less damage the further you go in. The worst damage from the worms tends to occur in the very early pages and the very late pages, I should say folios, of the register. And the worm damage is not focused on the edges. So if these registers, which tend to run about 300 folios, so it's like 300 sheets of paper, if they were stored vertically, like, the way that you see books in a bookstore these days, then you would expect that the worm damage would focus on the edges, and it would be way less common to have worm damage in the middle. And that when you are opening up the register, you're not going to see a variation in the early pages versus the middle pages. That's, I think, what would be more likely if the registers were stored for centuries vertically. But if they were stored for centuries horizontally, then maybe it was easier for the worms to get into the empty spaces between the registers as opposed to getting in through the space in between the sheets, which would have been compressed, right? So that's my theory. I mean, if you have a stack of registers, then they're going to weigh each other down and reduce the amount of space the little worms and insect larvae can get in. But my theory is that they were stored horizontally and that we see the evidence of that in the distribution of the wormholes. But I am definitely not the most educated on this topic, and one point I would really like to talk with somebody who has a lot of experience, one of the archivists at the Archive of the Crown of Aragon, and they'll be able to tell me for sure the answer to that question of what the worm damage can tell us about the way that these items were stored over the course of the centuries and how often the boxes that held them were opened up. Let's talk about the content of the document and its apparatus. We've got something super interesting in the probata. I love this probata. It is really just pitched right at my research question, because what we see in the probata is 3 lines. First line, Domina Regina ex parte. So what that means is the Lady Queen on behalf of. Then we go to the next line, Domini Rex, on behalf of the king. And then continuing the second line, Mandavit mihi, so commanded me. And then the third line, the wormhole has taken out the letter at the beginning, but you can sort of see enough of the loop on the left and a clear descender. So this is a P, and then we have de Beniore. So it's Per de Beniore. We know it was there. It was the first name of the scribe, a very frequent scribe for Joan. But we have here, instead of Joan or Joan's chancellor or the treasurer or anybody else that we've seen in these probatas, we have Violant, Domina Regina, on behalf of the king, commanded me. So this is really interesting. The other thing that we can note at the end of this document, the end of the text block, is that we have Dominicus Moscow, the chancellor, the vice chancellor that we learned the other day, about 5 episodes ago, was supposed to be just for Valencia, according to the material in the book by Tranxiodania and Aragon. So here we're not talking about Valencia, we're talking about the province of Aragon, and specifically something that happened in Navarre. So what Dominicus Moscow is doing in this document, at the end of this document, signing this document, I'm not sure. But, I mean, let's not lose sight of just how we have explicitly here that Violant has been closely involved in the creation of this document. We can tell that through the Mandavit mihi, but it is with Joan's scribe, and it's in Joan's register. And the message in the probata is that Violant has done this on behalf of Joan. And the letter begins, the document at the very top begins Johannes, etc. So it's written in Joan's name, but it has been commanded by Violant. So look, I mean, do you get any more explicit on co-rule than something like that? It's pretty, and I have to just kind of wonder, is this new? Or I mean, I really struggled with understanding the probata for the many weeks, but I would have known enough to recognize ex parte in a probata, and also to notice that we've got a doubling of the Domina Regina and Domini Rex happening, on the first and second line. So I would have noticed this. And so my feeling is that there has been an increase in the amount of cooperation and coordination. And I think that what they went through with Joan almost dying at the end of April is impactful. I think that, of course, if we think all the way back to the way that this reign started, when Violant was in Barcelona and Joan was too sick to continue the journey from Girona to Barcelona, and how Violant was there in the palace the day after Pere died, or maybe even the day that he did die. She was there and Joan was not. And then, maybe things kind of revert to tradition a little bit in the subsequent weeks as we get into February and March and April. And so then maybe it's looking like, okay, things are just going to be more like the traditional expectation for a queen and a king. But then the illness takes its disastrous turn for Joan, and he is so greatly weakened that I think what we're witnessing is that a new pattern of work has been established, a new division of labor that maybe gets set in and helps to explain why it is that Violant is the one in 1388 to 1389 who is seen as the political heft in this operation when it comes to the important deal making of the Cortes of Monzon. So I think we're looking at the establishment of what would become the normal way of operation for this monarchy. And I think that explains why, as we get into the second half of the year, we're going to maybe notice more and more documents like this and the one yesterday, where we're just seeing this interwoven quality between the work of the king and the work of the queen and their various officials and staff members. Let's talk about the document itself. So this has a very clear addressee line where it is being sent to Sancho Martinez, the governor of Aragon. He has not been fired. They were so mad at him for dragging his feet with certain confiscations of property of Sibilla de Fortia and her brother Bernat de Fortia. So there were some episodes on that, I think in March, and so I'll link to those in the webpage for today's episode. But Sancho Martinez was the recipient of some very, very angry and castigatory notes from Joan and Violant, and he is still there. So apparently you can get them very angry and still keep your job, at least for a while. We'll see if Sancho Martinez is still the governor of Aragon when we get into the later part of the year. And then we have something interesting, which is that we have a title for Sancho It's actually in Latin, I think it would be Sancho Martini de Biota. That's his name. And then we've got some titles at the end of line 1, Militi, knight. And then the word Guarenti. And then I think we've got something like Nostra and Gubernatoris. And then De Regno Aragonis. So the realm of the Kingdom of Aragon, as distinct from the Crown of Aragon. So this is, the provinces were referred to as kingdoms. So the Crown of Aragon united the Kingdom of Aragon with the Kingdom of Valencia and the Kingdom of Majorca. So it's a bunch of kingdoms under this Crown of Aragon. So when we see documents like this, we're not really supposed to be reading it like there's a separate king of Aragon. It's just they kept this name kingdom, even though At this point, it operates very much like a province or something like a state level of government we might think of in the United States. But I skipped over something that was pretty momentous in my own understanding, which, and there was Ghost piping up to be excited about this momentous moment, which is guarantee. So we've seen that word just yesterday. I was like, what is this word? What is happening with this word in front of gubernatori? And now I'm kicking myself because I feel like it's very formulaic and it happens a lot, and I just didn't really notice it before, that guarantee or some kind of form of that word comes before gubernatoris, and that's because guarantee, I have learned or been reminded of from Whitaker's Words, my online Latin dictionary, that guarantee is the present active participle of a very common word in Latin. It's like one of the first verbs that you learn when you're learning Latin, gero, gerere, which means when you first learn Latin, you learn that this means to wage war. Like if you're going to wage war, then, or if you're going to carry something out, then you are going to use the verb gero, gerere. And it also has other definitions like to manage something, to conduct oneself as something. And so clearly what is being meant here in this use of guarantee in the participle, the present active participle, which a participle changes a verb into a noun, right? Or is it, yeah, it's a noun, right? Or is it an adjective? Oh my gosh. Okay. So it's like when you say that you are oh my gosh, now I'm messing up my understanding of participle. But okay, let me see if I can do this without stopping the recording. What's being explained here is that he is currently conducting himself. He's currently, oh my gosh, that's Ghost again, frustrated because I messed up my understanding of a participle. All right, let me get through this. All right, if he's the governor, he is currently conducting himself as the governor. So it's like an adjective, right? So it's a descriptor for what he is doing. He is currently acting, managing, carrying out the job of governor, right? So the verb is turned into a descriptor. Oh my gosh, I just slaughtered that explanation in a bad way, of participle. But I'll do better on the webpage. I'll, give a nice, concise definition of what a participle is there. But anyway, this is mystery solved. When I see some form of like a GER, like here it's guarantee, when it's abbreviated, when I see that GER before gubernatoris, it's definitely not a place name. It is instead just a formulaic way of referring to someone who currently has the job of governor. They're doing their job. All right. There's another recipient to this, because after Regno Aragon, we have et, and then we have another name, Michaeli de Capella, Jurispito, oh my god, Jurisperito Cesar Augusta. So a jurist of Zaragoza. All right. So it's people who are officials in the province, the realm of Aragon. And then we get into the document and we find out that the topic is something that Joan and Violant have heard from the King of Navarre. And the King of Navarre is referred to as nobis carissimum consanguinum fratrem, our dearest relative brother, our brother by blood, our dearest brother by blood, the King of Navarre. All right. So, what has taken place is that there has somehow been damage. So, in line 8, there's this phrase qualia et quanta dampnam. And so there's been some kind and amount of damage done in Navarre, and the word marche is used quite a bit in this section of the document. So in the border regions between Aragon and Navarre, there's been some damage. And now what Violant and Joan want is for the governor of Aragon and this jurist, this official of Zaragoza, to calculate how much damage has been done so that they can provide some remedy to the King of Navarre. So the word informationem is used in this document, put together some information. There is this line in line 14. There's this word lady. So that is a present passive infinitive for to injure. So there has been some kind of injury done that they want to remedy. So the phrase is sincera benevolencia lady posset remediis. So they want to be able to remedy the injury that has been done. And let's see what else. Oh, yeah. So in the line that starts with, it's line 10, I think we've got the word economico, but I'm not quite economic. No, it's like some kind of ER. I'm wrong about that. Oh my gosh. I was like really excited to find that word, but now that I'm looking at it again, the abbreviation mark is for an ER. So it's something more like econario. I'm going to have to come back to that. All right. That's the content of this letter, and it is kind of formulaic and repetitive, and the overall sense of it is there's been damage done, and so we need to have a calculation of what we need to pay to the King of Navarre in order to remedy this damage. I was really searching around in this document for a word that would provide some kind of detail about what caused the damage, and I couldn't find any word that would seem to fill that function. I did not use AI for this document. The number of wormholes made me think that it would cause way too many misreads for automatic transcription, because while the human eye can very easily distinguish between the ink and the wormhole, it is a little bit more difficult for the computer to parse those out. And so I've seen the wormholes cause pretty dramatic misreads, and there's like a wormhole on almost every line. So I kind of figured that this wouldn't really be worth it to do the usual AI routine for a Latin document. And also, as I just kind of worked with it, I was able to get an overall sense of what's going on. Although maybe I am missing something big here. And that's kind of the way that the temptation to use AI creeps in, where you're like, ooh, well, maybe there's a chance that if I put this into AI, it would discover something that then would tip me off and help me answer a question of what is the cause of this damage. And that's what I really want to know for this document. What brought about this situation here that must now be remedied? But I want to just take a moment to say, let's not use the environmental resources. I've got a good enough understanding of the content of this document. My argument is not so much about the events that brought about the damage, but instead this response. And for that, I have what I need. And so I'm going to resist the temptation to see what comes through if I put this through my own AI process with Gemini and Claude and just say, we're good enough right now. One other thing to mention is that with the AI process, it might be helpful to compare what I have come up with on my own to what the AI will come up with as sort of like an experiment. So I thought about, well, I've got my understanding and now I can test my understanding with AI. But a document full of wormholes is not the document to conduct that test with, because it's just going to waste a lot of time identifying, like I'm going to waste a lot of time figuring out, oh, that is a mistake on the part of the AI because of the wormhole versus, how it does in reading the paleography. So that's the stand I'm taking right now. It's not really like the biggest ethical stance in the world, but it's just recognizing that you don't always have to use AI and that we should, pay attention to that and not just automatically always use it. And try to just, moderate. Moderate, I think, is a good word to think of here. All right, thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, well, I've given you one, right? What caused the damage? Oh, wait, I have an idea. Like wrapping up the episode, but I just really quickly want to say maybe it's the feuds in Jaca that are doing it. Maybe it's from that, or maybe it's from the mercenary companies that went through Navarre on their way to Castile. So two possibilities, both involving some mercenaries that we've read about already that could be the cause of this damage. All right, okay. With that and more questions raised, I will say that remember the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. And we've heard from Ghost a whole bunch in this episode. She's not satisfied. Sorry, Ghost. Visit the website to see an image of today's document with all of its glorious wormholes and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign. Jeez, she's really... in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.